dear friend, President, Mr. Governor, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Member of the Parliament, dear friends. First of all, I would like to thank and to congratulate Mr. Tsikas, the President of the organization, on his invitation in such a difficult year and in such an irregular fair. I won't hide the fact from you that this is a very special evening for me. The experience I'm having from this evening is very special compared to the other attendees of the forum. My memory goes back to my childhood years in these grounds where the Thessaloniki International Fair was held. Every corner of this fair brings memories of my childhood to my mind. When I was a young boy and later on as a university student, walking around the pavilions and later on the political chats. And since we're all together here, I'd like to share a political thought of mine with you. I'm very happy to see the gradual transition of the fair from this center of carelessness and carefree spirit to a dynamic center of politics and economy that is a jewel for Greece and Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, the pandemic crisis has brought existential concerns for us. A new world has been rising, but it's not only the pandemic that makes these days special ones, but also the contemporary grid of problems surrounding it. On the one hand, the unacceptable Turkish challenges and provocations in the eastern of the Aegean with language that reminds us of the Middle Ages and not the 21st century, as well as Moria on the island of Lesbos that brings us again the issue of asylum and immigration. At the same time, the continuous effort of Europe to tackle the pandemic and to organize its strategy in this increasingly hostile world towards Europe. It's high time to talk about all these issues. And there is no better opportunity than this hospitable podium of Helexpo Forum. And this discussion must be sober, a cool one, with optimism and stubbornness. The economic crisis has been constant for the last 10 years. It had peaks and lows. Its culmination was in the middle of this decade when the high flows of immigrants after the collapse of Syria, the lack of centers of identification, and the failure of keeping the agreement between Turkey and the EU have enlarged this situation, especially on the island of Lesbos. Despite the difficulties that I've mentioned, at the beginning of the pandemic in March, 42,000 people were hosted in the islands. Today they are few. On Lesbos there were 25,000. Today 12,000. At Moria, there were 1,200 escorted minors. Today, no one. We, as the European Commission, we have given more than 2.6 billion euros for the management of the migration issue. And we have given extraordinary subsidies for potential cases of coronavirus in camps, migration camps. And we have asked a lot of politicians to help for the tackling of the migration issue. But now the time has come to tackle the short-term needs that have come up on the island of Lesbos. We have already funded and financed a ferry boat that can host 1,600 refugees and immigrants if it's needed. We have already helped the Greek authorities in order to host vulnerable groups in a temporary camp, and we have activated the European protection mechanism with the protection of more than 10 EU member states, and more are expected to join. Jointly with the Greek Prime Minister, the German Chancellor, and the competent minister who is presiding in the Council, we have expressed our joint opinion in public for the need to tackle this tragedy immediately. A new wave of resettlement of vulnerable groups from our islands is in progress. In the meantime, we will work closely with the government in order to create a new pilot center on the island of Lesbos that won't remind us of the shameful Moria, and it will depict the more active engagement of the European Union in the policy of asylum and immigration in our country. But now it's high time for all of us to act together. We in the Commission have never invested in the pain and the agony of our persecuted fellow beings. We never played with the hopes of our local fellow citizens, but we will not follow the blackmails that serve only traffickers. From the beginning of our term, we committed ourselves for a new, comprehensive, cohesive European policy governed by solidarity and fair distribution of burdens, but will provide the strong protection of our borders that won't repeat the mistakes of 2016 when the few hindered the many to move forward in order to settle the problem. And the universal, unprecedented support of the three presidents of the top European institutions present on Evros this month shows the message that this European perspective is feasible. Next week, on the 23rd of September, the College of Commissioners will approve a new package for asylum and immigrants. This proposal will have three basic axes. The first one is to reach and make agreements with the countries of origin and transition that will create more opportunities for the refugees to remain in their countries instead of pushing them to give their lives in the hands of traffickers. Secondly, a common, strong management of the foreign borders of the Union with a reinforced frontier guard and coast guard. A precursor of that we saw on Evros. Thirdly, the distribution of burdens in all member states with permanent and effective solidarity. I'll start with the last point. Allocation means responsibility and fair distribution through a solidarity mechanism that will make the asylum seekers imperative and safeguarded in practice. Spain, Greece, Italy, Malta, these are the frontline countries that receive immigrants, and they cannot receive all the burdens forever in the name of the others. Europe cannot handle this issue without sourcing. We do need a permanent European framework of solidarity. Management of frontiers means strong frontiers and borders with the support of the real European frontier guard and coast guard, manned and equipped with adequate number of frontier guards that will be trained and will have the necessary equipment. With our own proposal, Frontex will have its own personnel. By the year 2027, it will amount to thousands of permanent guards, both men and women, who will not be dispatched from another agency. For the first time in the history of the EU, there will be a European mechanism that will be based on the same equipment with its own means, ships and helicopters, and will bear the emblem of the EU. And finally, we will make clear that this agreement will also mean returns to the countries of origins of all those who cannot be protected by asylum. Europe will remain an asylum destination for the persecuted of the world, but those who don't have a reason and a legal reason to be in Europe, they will be returned. Ladies and gentlemen, last week in Lesbos, a cycle ended with a deafening sound, and this cycle will remind us forever of what we should never experience again. Europe is the greatest market of the world. It represents more than 20% of the world GDP. It has the second currency of reference in the whole world. We are pioneer in our social rights, social structures, fundamental freedoms. Just in July, we agreed upon an unprecedented recovery mechanism with a great amount of money. It's unthinkable that this Europe that has achieved so much still hasn't got a single migration policy. I do know that the way ahead of us is hard and harsh. Next Wednesday, a very complicated negotiation is starting, but I'm optimistic. I believe that this time governments will follow us, and these governments have the responsibility of the agreement and the creation of a final document. Europe doesn't have the luxury to fail on migration issue for a second time. Dear friends, once again, next week, in just a few days, the European Council will be called upon to define our total strategy vis-à-vis Turkey. Up to then, Turkey ought to choose and select whether it will continue being a provocative and annoying neighbor or whether it will become a reliable partner and ally. A country that should look towards the West in a conscious way, without bluffing, playing, bargaining, as it does in the East, giving the impression that it turns its back to those that are willing and can help it. The line of the Commission is clear-cut to that, with having the full agreement of the President of the European Council and the European Parliament, whom I personally informed extensively last Monday. Our neighbors should know that the only way is the de-escalation and dialogue. The steady European solidarity on this issue has already given results, specific results. I do hope that these first signs of de-escalation to become fixed. Otherwise, there will be consequences. Dear friends, just 2 days ago, the President of the Commission gave its first speech about the State of the Union, the overall platform for the year to come. A different reality, a different world was expressed in this presentation in relation to the world that we were planning when we took over just a year ago. Going through this last year, we will see that with the exception of the goals that we set for green and digital Europe, which are still current and even more reinforced, we have changed our course of direction to a great extent. In this new direction, in this new world, there is no doubt that the anchor of our future will be the recovery fund, the fund of recovery and resilience. I am well aware of the concern of the market concerning the time of reimbursement of funds. In mid-October, Greece will submit its own plan of recovery and resilience with investments and reforms aiming to be funded by the fund. The European Commission will directly negotiate the text with the Greek government, and the finalization of this document will be done in January. We believe that having the consent of the European Commission, 10% of the national plan for recovery will be paid off. I want to be clear-cut. Right now we're talking about targeted investment in human beings, in employees, in self-employed, in workers. Just yesterday we announced the guidebook for the year to come concerning our social and economic targets for the following year. What is important? Importance will be given to the human force of the country and the social cohesion of the country, to unemployed and employed people, young and old, who seek new skills. Emphasis will also be given to structure reforms in the public sector, in the financial sector, and the health sector. It's high time, taking advantage of this historic coincidence of recovery fund, to move on to a different growth and development model. This new model for our new Greece will aim at acceleration of justice and creation of skills that will match what the market and society demand, that will crush trade unionism rationale and will take usage of our human force, that will create an effective and fair insurance security system that won't give pension to middle age, but will become a big levier of investment. We owe more dreams, more opportunities and more wealth to the young Greeks, to the young Greek generation, to the brain-drained generation, which should be the last one that is forced to leave the country. All this change of the development and growth model of the country should occur today, now that our country has the opportunity to have a new additional NSRF, a new, much bigger Marshall package that will try to tackle the three big crises that we suffered this decade: the health crisis, the economic crisis, and the migration crisis. From this podium, the Prime Minister said one word that is important at our times, the word self-confidence. I want to reinforce this this message and even to complement it, reassuring you that Europe will support with resources, funds and means this strategic goal. Here in Central Macedonia, you know very well what European support means. Giving you just 900 euros for big pioneering projects only for this current programming period. I won't refer to that. The competent ministers presented it the previous days from this podium. The completion of the underground and the subway construction, but which we have used all words that could exist, and what is left is only action and measures, as well as Thessaloniki, which in combination with universities and the brilliant minds we have, could be a brilliant research center. The Havria Dam in Halkidiki, the flyover, the road networks, the tens of thousands of schools, and the landmark project for our city, which is the restructuring of the Thessaloniki International Fair, which was characterized by Mr. Mitsotakis as a project that will bring fresh breath to the city. In the next 7 years, there will be adequate resources to that end. However, the planning of the new NSRF should be done in such a way that will depict the real developmental needs of the country and the regions for the following 7 years. And for the first time, the planning of NSRF will coincide with the planning for the recovery fund. This gives us the luxury to make use of a broad range of financial tools, but we should be cautious about how and who will be benefited from these financial tools. And we can learn a lot from the mistakes that we made in the past from the old NSRF. These mistakes should never be made again. A characteristic example of such a tool that could provide immediate aid is the approval of 150 million euros for small and very small businesses in Central Macedonia that was recently approved, that will give immediate relief aid in the businesses of Thessaloniki, Seres, Kilkis and Pella. And there is a lot of interest expressed to them. I would like also to remind you that everything, all this that the European Union has done for our country is part of a much greater program and plan of economic help that we put for, that we started in order to help all EU countries due to the pandemic. This framework amounts to 5 trillion euros. Many of the things that we have done are forgotten, that are not mentioned and are not related to Europe, but we should remind them to you. I'm talking about the implementation of the framework of temporary protection measures, the exemption from the stability mechanism, to use the current NSRF, the program SUV for the short-term unemployment with 100 billion in total and 3 billion for our country, and the Mammoth program of the Central European Bank, thanks to which Greece is benefited because it participates to it. That's why the lending cost for our country has a very low rate. All these have kept us still upright during the first phase of the pandemic. Although we were hit, we have lost a lot of our fellow beings, our economy has greatly suffered, and it will take time. We need time to heal these wounds. From this traumatic experience, which is still going on, it is useful for someone to take lessons for the future. The first lesson is that it's high time for Europe to reinforce its competencies in fields and sectors in which the citizens expected to have more. For example, public health and crisis management. So we proposed a new health framework. We are having in progress the new strategy so that all Europeans will have access to affordable drugs and medicines, the European program against the cancer, and the agreement for the purchase of the COVID vaccine for all the Europeans, which is in progress. Second lesson, Europe should become autonomous at last in strategic sectors so that its dependence on suppliers for telecommunications and medicines won't be the rule. The pandemic should occur so that we would learn that in Europe we don't manufacture in Europe any more masks because 80% of health equipment is produced beyond Europe. At the same time, misleading information and network attacks against Europe won't stop, and it will become even more intense. Therefore, we as European institutions and as citizens, we must be more determined and more aggressive and more well prepared. And the third lesson was that the European unification should make a great leap forward every time that it has to tackle this kind of crisis. This third lesson made us make the historic decisions of July concerning the recovery fund. And this lesson reminds us that the greatest enemy of Europe is stability. Is steadiness. Sometimes what is needed is a crisis to shake us and to move forward, not to become steady, to remain steady. Dear friends, dear fellow citizens, I was also born in Thessaloniki, and this is the 1st September that I find myself in my birthplace, being surrounded by friends, my teachers, my professors, people who shared my course of life. It's the 1st September that I visit my birthplace under my new capacity. Allow me to conclude this presentation with some more personal views about the future of this city and the region. If we go back in history of our homeland here, there is no doubt that today we find ourselves, just like our ancestors thousands of years ago, in the main crossroads of West and East. Broader historic continuum of history and civilization. Via Egnatia, St. Paul Steps, Thermaikos, Gulf, that inspired Kassandros to lay the foundations of a city that is unique in time and duration. Thessaloniki is a city that has the rare privilege in Europe that has 2,500 years of continuous history. It's a great city, a metropolitan city, and a co-capital. Last year, when it was at this time when the President von der Leyen announced the name and the structure of my portfolio that includes a lot of European targets that are very pressing, this vice presidency for the protection of the European life, for the promotion of the European way of life, I felt that it reflects my identity, not only because I have dedicated my life to the European edifice and my personal course is linked to Europe, but because I couldn't think of a better model, of a better symbolism for the European way of life than my birthplace, Thessaloniki. Thessaloniki is a bridge city among cultures, languages, religions. It's the homeland of Christians, Muslims, Jews, with 15 monuments of World Heritage, tens of thousands of museums, from archaeology up to the most contemporary trends of architecture, of Ernest Rebra, of Aridoni, of Furkioti Peonidis, that were linked with the traces of the Byzantine majesty. A city that lives through the arts, the creation, the creativity, its festivals, its stages, its theaters that have created artistic trends all over the city, all over the country. Thessaloniki, the city of research and innovation. It's the most dynamic it's the most dynamic in innovation. It has a great Aristotle University. Thessaloniki that gives champions everywhere. Thessaloniki that was a youth capital and cultural capital in the EU. Thessaloniki that linked its name with the progress of all the regions, of all the countries in the region. Thessaloniki that knows what refugee means, what it means to be persecuted. It had gone through fire, famine, earthquakes, distractions, and painful conditions, but it was still there, tolerant, and was rebuilt. It respects history and battle, and it keeps on looking ahead through time, both towards the West and towards the East. Its outward feeling and hospitality, it's part of its DNA, and its historic cohesion to bridge the peoples of the region is integrally linked nowadays to the irrevocable decision of the countries of the Western Balkans to link and connect their future and destiny with Europe. With the negotiation agreements for the accession of Northern Macedonia, and it has already been in the pipeline, and the Romania and Bulgaria negotiations for their accession to Schengen that will change this picture. We have the fortune to live in a cosmic metropolite city that has proven that this city wants everybody. A new generation that thinks differently here in Greece and in the Balkans, that looks at the common points and not at what separates people, that respects the history of the other and doesn't rewrite it, with a lot of young people who live, study, travel one next to the other, and people of the market that know nowadays how to work together, to trade and to do business, with a port that goes up to the Danube and an airport that in just a few months has proven that it can truly become a hub in southeastern Europe. A city that is a true investment cell with Helexpo that is hosting universities, business people and think tanks from all over the world. This is the European way of life that I am committed to serve for the following 4 years. This city is the absolute symbol and inspiration for me. A city that has a lot of grandeur and greatness with no frontiers in its perspectives and prospects. Dear President, dear friends, I have talked more than I'm used to, but as I've said at the beginning of my speech, this is a very special, emotional evening for me, and I apologize for that. I'm convinced that next year we will meet under better conditions in a new Europe that will be ready for the new world that is rising, with societies that will be more resilient, more cohesive, and having more solidarity, with neighbors, all our neighbors, willing to work together, cooperate, and share the common benefits of stability and peace, with human moments when we will not be afraid to get closer to the other and hug the other, embrace the other. Next September, we'll have left this year's September in the past, a beautiful September, as it is always at this time of the year, as we're used to. You should be certain that if we are patient, our good habits will come back soon. And who knows, probably this experience might have taught us to forget the bad habits behind us. So having our mind to this next September of 2021, for a new chapter of optimism where everything will be different, better and more productive. Till then, may we all work well and may we meet again. Thank you very much.